All right, my name is Rich Schmidt. I'm here with Bryan Berenguer. We're at his home in Dundee. It's February 26th, 2021. Bryan, thank you so much for joining us today. First question to get you rolling, why wine? Why grapes?
Yeah, thanks. I've been watching some of the interviews, so I knew this question was coming, and I've been trying to think how to answer this question, why wine? It's a simple question with, I think, a lot of complicated, complex answers. Some of them are very straightforward, and some of them are more complex and winding. I don't know which one I'll fall into. but yeah, so how to say this? I just thought that I would just be completely open and honest and straightforward in answering this question and see how we go. So, I mean, why wine? I think looking at wine culturally, like what is it in terms of historically and culturally, right? Historically, we needed it. Now it's a luxury product, right? We don't need it to survive. We think we do sometimes, right? But yeah, I mean, it was used to purify water, basically, right? And that's basically how the Greeks moved around and the Romans moved around and basically created these inroads that kind of connected Europe, and they brought wine with them out of necessity, right? So, and this is kind of our heritage, and as wine expanded throughout, so it did its integration into ceremonies, into religious, and became for special occasions. And basically grew out of that. So in terms of, it's a European or Western culture, I think it plays an important part in that.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of my personal culture, I grew up in the South. There's not a lot of grapes there. I was more tobacco land. But we had wine in our house. It always came out for special occasions, and that's kind of where I think I associated it with special occasions as a child or as a young adult. I never really bought it myself, more or less because I couldn't really afford it, especially in high school and in college. But yeah, it was always there. So in terms of culturally, I feel like that is a part. But yeah, I think we'll come back to this kind of it being a luxury product and its status in our society, and especially in climate change or in a changing environment. Right. But yeah, for me, my first experience with vineyards and wine, personally, outside of that, was actually I took a trip to South Africa, and I stayed for about 3.5 weeks with a friend of mine. I don't think that they thought I was going to come actually, but I bought a ticket, and I was, 20, I think, at the time, in the late 90s, and I went there, and we took a trip to Stellenbosch, which is beautiful, and out there trying this drink, this wine that I had kind of forgotten how good it was, or I guess I hadn't matured enough to realize how good it was. And the area was also extremely beautiful. But that was all kind of pushed down and overshadowed by the poverty and the inequality and just the violence that I saw in South Africa in that time. Just, not too long post-apartheid, a lot of shanty towns, a lot of let's say assaults on people just for money, so people could survive, and that kind of really shocked me, as well as that was, I think, my second time out of the country. First time I went to visit a friend I met in high school in Japan. That's a whole other story, and that also kind of opened my eyes, turned the whole world around. Asia's everything is different than here. But yeah, so that issue of wine kind of stayed there in the undercurrents, but I was really more shocked by the poverty. But I moved on. As a young man, you think about career, and as you graduate college, and I had a few internships in California, working for a small pharmaceutical company that got bought by a bigger pharmaceutical company that got bought by a very, very big pharmaceutical company, and that's kind of how I ended up working after college in a pharmaceutical lab. I did graduate from a small college in North Carolina in biology. Basically microbiology, and I went and worked in a lab in San Diego, California for a year. And I made great money. I was close to the beach. It was nice, but there was just this kind of nagging weight on my ethics, so to say. And I everyone knows this, and I hate to say it, very straightforward, but of a lot of pharmaceutical companies, helping people's health is second to making money. And that's just not what I believed in personally. So I did that, but at the same time, there was always this kind of nag, and I was having a lot of philosophical thoughts about what do I do, and do I continue with this or not? I also wasn't very happy in San Diego. I'm getting a completely different culture to the south as well. People would say maybe are not as friendly. But anyway, nothing against people from San Diego. I met some great people in San Diego. Right? But yeah, so I was telling a friend about that, and she said, well, my aunt is looking for someone to work in Thailand. It's remote. But they need someone. They can't find a local person. Do you want to go? And they'll pay your airfare and and basically give you housing and pay you a local salary. And so I said, wow, great. I've been to Thailand once before. I did a semester in Australia as well in college. So coming through, I went through Thailand just to see what it's like. And I thought, great, I'll go back. I know the place, and I know like Asia. And where I ended up going was completely not like where I had been before in Thailand. Way on the border of Myanmar, or Burma, as they call it officially here. And basically, working both in refugee camps and also in villages along the border, because there was at that time a long-running war, many wars in Myanmar. One of them was on the border there. So I just met these amazing people. They're these amazing farmers, and basically who had gone through a tough time. And if you've ever seen people hit by or who stepped on a landmine, it's not a pleasant thing. And there was a lot of that. The Myanmar army basically lined the whole borders with landmines, and kids would step on them. And there wasn't really proper medical care. Also, so a lot of what you would think of an amputee. It wasn't so clean cut as what we would see here, and sometimes even like the bone would just be liquefied, and there'd just be flesh around. That also shocked me quite a lot. It gave me a drive really to help people, and coming also from they would say a developed country, you get lots of questions that everyone expects you to know all the answers to, and basically I thought, all right, well, I should go back to school to really be able to answer these questions and help people give them like really correct answers, because sometimes I was just guessing. Tropical agriculture is very far away removed from what things are in the South. So I did that for a couple of years, and then I went back to North Carolina to graduate school. And I had a hard time at first, coming back to my culture, to my society. But I did meet some people who had worked abroad, and that was good. And I took a bit longer to finish my degree, which was in agriculture systems, that I should have, because I took time off. I went and did a short kind of consultancy in Cambodia for a very small farm that wanted to turn organic, and I don't want to go into that story. It involves it's quite long, and it involves black magic and suicide and lots of other really crazy stuff that happened, and corruption, a lot of corruption that caused black magic and suicide. And I as well went to the Gambia as well, and worked on a project starting fresh market vegetables. So a lot of the vegetables brought to Gambia, there's big tourism in Gambia from especially from people from the UK. Mm-hmm. But all their vegetables were also being shipped from Spain, so why can't we grow them there, right? Mm-hmm. So the goal of that was to start that up, so I took some time off, a year off from school, did that, and then I came back and finished up, and then got a job in Bolivia. So I went to Bolivia, and Valle Grande is where I worked there for just a little bit over a year and a half. It's also where Che Guevara was killed, so sometimes you'd have huge amounts of Cubans coming in on kind of pilgrimages. It was really interesting. It was nice, especially improved my Spanish. I learned Spanish more or less in the South just by my passings with migrant workers, and then that really kind of helped me to pick it up. There's different slang there, so of course some of my slang would not relate to other people in other countries. But yeah, I was still young then, and I got another call from people who I knew in Thailand that said, "Yeah, we started a small nonprofit in Myanmar. Do you want to come and run it?" And I was kind of thought, no, yeah, maybe. I'd love to get back to Asia, but I saw everything that the Myanmar army did to the people who were on the borders, and I kind of thought, do I really want to go help them? Do I really want to go be involved in that? And after a lot of thought, I said yes, and I took it, and I went there. This was in 2007, when the country was still under the very heavy military regime that it was. So I'm going to get back to wine. I'm going to come to wine eventually. So it's hard now. So.
This is a great background. This is wonderful.
Okay. Yeah. So I was there. crazy place. People were assigned to me to follow me around, sometimes openly, sometimes quietly. Even getting in took me quite a long time to get my visa. And if you ever had a tourist visa, if you'd ever been to Myanmar, you weren't allowed to work there, basically. So luckily, I had to get a second passport and kind of go in that way, because I had crossed the border once in Thailand over officially. Sometimes we crossed over accidentally all the time, but we didn't really know it. But yeah, and so I went there. I walked with the monks. There was a big protest in 2007 against gas prices, where all the monks came out and walked in with several other people, and I did. Some of them who I knew, some of them came to stay with me because they were worried that they would disappear later. Really not a lot of violence up front, but that kind of eerie fear, because people there, they weren't taken during the day, they were taken at night. So everyone's fear was of the knock on the door at 2 o'clock in the morning. But yeah, I made some great friends, and people would just come up and talk to me just because they wanted to talk to me. There were very, very few foreigners in Myanmar at that time. Very, very few. So much that there was a party once a month where everyone came and it was like 30 people. It wasn't a lot. There were not a lot of people there at that time, but it's nice. And I was still there running small NGO until 2008, when a giant storm called Cyclone Nargis hit Myanmar. I don't know if you guys had heard of it, but it came through and it basically killed around 250,000 people and affected around 2 or 3 million. So I was there in the capital of that storm. I remember coming home, I was out at a bar with a friend, and the taxi had to keep diverting because trees were like falling down in front of us. And I got home to my apartment in Yangon, and all my windows blew in, like from the force of the wind. And I just was like bailing water out. And the next day, cell phone was out. I had a cell phone. The SIM card at that time cost $5,000. I didn't buy it, I had to rent it for $50 a month. But yeah, I was out, power was out, everything was out. And no one really knew what happened until people started to come up from this delta area just south of Yangon. And we started to get word of how bad it was down there. And I wanted to go help, I wanted to get down there, but I didn't have permission. Because at that time, you couldn't leave any of the 3 major towns without special permission. And my organization did not have that. And so I met up on these coordination meetings. There was a meeting where everyone came together to try to think what they could do. And I met the owner, or not the owner, sorry, the country manager of quite a big German nonprofit there that I didn't know was big, called Welthungerhilfe. It's a very funny name. So I just went to talk to her and say, I know you are involved, I know you have permission to go down. I really would like to go down and help and work with you guys. I'll just do it for free, if necessary. And they went back, they thought about it, they took my CV, they wrote down my CV because there was no printer, it was working. And then the next day they hired me. And I didn't find out until later, but there was a long phone conversation that they had with their head office if they could hire me. One, because I was young, I just turned 30, and most of their project managers were in their 40s. And secondly, because I wasn't German. I was the second person to be hired by this company was not German. And the reason why I'm telling you that is because basically all of the emails that came in to me when I could get email, and the documents, basically the proposal of what we had to do in our project, and also the handbook of how you have to manage your office, was all in German, the whole thing. So I basically had a dictionary, and I translated that, and by doing that, I ended up accidentally learning German. So I'll come back to it. I still don't know the alphabet, but I can say really complicated things for some reason, and that will play in later. So I went down. We ended up being on the floor of one of the few buildings standing. They pulled staff from all the project, hired a lot of other people, and I ended up having, 80, 90 people under me, and we were just trying to get food out. And the first thing you try to do is you try to go and see what happened. So I went out. We had different teams going out. I was in one team, and I went out in the boats, because this is an area that's very, very flat. There's no roads. It's only riverways. And we went through, and we'd be driving through, and we'd hear this kind of like on the side of the boat, and you go out to sea, and it was just dead bodies everywhere. I mean, I'm talking about like we drive through patches of like 50 to 100 dead bodies. I don't know if you've ever seen you see it in the movies, right? A dead body has been in the water, but if you've really ever seen a dead body that's been in the water for 4 or 5, 6 days, it looks completely. It's a whole other story. And that happened every day for about a week, because as the tides would come in and out, it would push people, push the bodies around and move. I mean, not only bodies, but buffaloes and other things that were down there. There'd be bodies in trees and in the fields, and it was a complete nightmare. And that hit me really, really hard. What hit me a bit harder were the people who were alive. It was like they had their soul sucked out of them. We go into villages and try to get a count of how many people were there, because the last census was done like 20 years ago. No one knew. And they'd be like, there's no more children. They all went into the school and it collapsed on them. So there's complete desolation, people, shells of themselves, and we're just trying to take inventory of what's there, what machinery is there we can fix, how many people need food, and just scrambling. And it's just me down there with 80 people in charge. So I worked very, very hard during that time. I also became quite close to my staff. Asian people don't really show a lot of emotion, but because I had a lot of people who went through that experience, or young people who was their first job and first time away from home, sometimes they would just come into my office and just start crying, and we'd have to talk through it. And a lot of it was, what they saw, but also some of it was like, my boyfriend broke up with me, or whatever, stuff like, I miss my parents, So I felt this very heavy sense of responsibility to help everyone, basically. And so eventually they managed to get people to come in, other people to come in, other technical experts, especially things like construction or water purification that we needed to do maybe about 4 or 5 months later. But it was just me every day there working late, and I did that without a break for 1 year, just every day working 15, 16 hours a day, and not sleeping because of the work, but also because I couldn't sleep. I would just wake up and have these pictures in my head, or visions, or senses of urgency. So I took a little time off, took a week. I took a week off, but I was still working, and then I went back, and I just kept doing that. There's long days, and I couldn't sleep at night. And basically, I started to try to think a longer term perspective as well on what can we do not only now to fix the problem, but to make things better for them, because hunger was already a problem before. Infant death because of poor water was always an issue before. What can we do? So I thought a lot about that. I wrote a lot of projects. I got a lot of money in as well, and just kept getting bigger and bigger. And I did that for 3 years basically. So I took breaks here and there, very short breaks. And I only found out later that when at the time of the emergency, when people started to arrive, they'd arrive for 3 months and they'd leave. And I'd be like, well, why are you staying so short? And I only found out later that that's like the standard procedure for emergency. People, you stay for 3 months or not because you burn out. And I did it for way too long, mostly because I was in a development. Development is slower, and you take a longer term perspective. So you don't think about going for 3 months. You think about going for at least 2 years to 10 years. You're thinking down the line 20 years. So yeah, I think that's why we never really thought that I should leave. So I did that for those 3 years, and then one day, I don't know what happened. I got just an email asking a question, or I don't know, but I just broke down in the middle of the day, completely lost it, and was almost incapacitated, and I had to be taken out of the country right away. So they took me out, sent me to Germany, where I was, and basically they said, all right, we'll cover the rest of your contract, and we'll get you some help. We recommend you go home for a while. The problem with that is that because of our cost of health insurance here, or cost of of health services. The very, very good health insurance I had from Germany covered me everywhere in the world but the US, because it's too expensive here. And every time I came home, if I did come home, I would basically have to buy travel insurance. So, like, where do I go? What do I do? And a friend ended up saying, I have a place in Berlin. You can stay. And I stayed there with the person I was in a relationship at the time, and then ended up starting to get help. I went through to a psychologist where he basically told me, you're never going to get better. You're never going to heal. All you can do is basically learn to live with this post-traumatic stress issue that you have. And so I didn't like that answer, So I tried to fight it quite a lot, and tried to heal in many different ways. It didn't really work out. I bought a place there. I took all the money that I'd saved up because I had very little expenses living there, and I bought a place. Tried to make a home. I thought, all right, if I have a home that's stable, then maybe I will somehow help me to heal. So I did that and worked on that. And you have this fear as well. Will I ever work again? Will I ever be a functioning member of society again? Mm-hmm. Can I ever go home again, considering the insurance issues? Or do I even want to go home? At the same time, my relationship was kind of falling apart also because of this. And I got this call from my very good friend, Pierre Ferrand, a French person who I knew from Myanmar, and this phone call basically saved my life. And I had very, very dark thoughts back there, and I wasn't sure if I was going to make it or not. Mm-hmm. Basically said, I'm going home to Montpellier, France, for a month, as I do every August. Do you want to come with me? And I said, yes, let me get out of here. So I went with him, and his family took me in Montpellier, France, just outside of Montpellier in a place called Ludève. And basically his family were farmers, and they basically had vineyards, and they were part of the cooperative, as many people in that part of France are. They farmed the grapes, sold it to the cooperative made wine, and they sold it. And this kind of brought me back again, sitting with him and his family and drinking wine, back to my culture, right? And how important wine was in my culture. And it kind of brought back a little bit of a sense of identity, because at that point I completely lost everything. I didn't even know who I was anymore at that point. And so I stayed there with him, and I really had a really good feeling, and worked a little bit in the vineyards, and it was great. It was great, and I thought this is something that I could do. But I wasn't quite ready. I wasn't quite ready yet. I had a lot of fears I needed to face. I needed to get myself together, so to say. So I went back to Berlin and started eventually to look for work. But while I was in Berlin is a pretty vibrant scene. Also, Germany is the biggest importer of wine in the world, so there was lots of wine, so I started to go out and to explore and try all the different wines from different regions, and really kind of fell in love with that, and that kind of brought me back to our culture, or my culture, so to speak. So I started doing some short-term assignments, as well as I went to Afghanistan, which was interesting. I went to Guatemala as well, and then I took another assignment in Malawi, and I ended up getting along well with the Irish organization in Malawi, and they asked me to stay on. So I did stay. I stayed on. I had a bit of a tough time there. Africa and Asia are very, very different in terms of working environments, but it basically answered my question of, can I work again? And so basically getting that there and working for a year under, again, a very, very big project. I think it was like $5 million per year. We were, it kind of helped me recover a little bit. And at the same time, I'm starting to realize that I got to learn to live with this thing. I can live with it. I have to accept that I can't heal it, but I have to live with it, and I have to start over from zero in terms of how I view myself and view my life and everything. So I wasn't so happy, as I was looking around here and there for other jobs, and people from the German NGO, they contacted me and said, hey, we really heard you're looking for jobs. Why don't you come back and work for us in Myanmar? And I thought, oh God, like, can I go back? What's that going to trigger? Like, am I going to go there and completely collapse again, or just fall back into the same pattern? What can I do? But I didn't like the way that I left and how things ended. I was very close to my staff before, and then I just suddenly broke off. It was very, very hard, I think. So the project that they wanted me to take over was run by a guy named Lothar Kinzelman, and he was very, very well respected inside and outside of the organization, the country. They basically called him the Seya G. Seya is like kind of teacher, and G is like big, so he's like the big teacher. And someone who I talked to a lot when I was before thinking, how do I move from emergency over to development? And he contacted me after that and says basically what he said is, if anyone comes to take over the project, it's got to be you. And so that was quite hard. So I said, all right, I can't really say no, so I'll go. So I went, took over his project. I tried for a while to be him as well, and then realized that I'm not him. And that was really kind of where that healing process started. I don't want to say healing again, but that's kind of where that recovery started. And I managed to maintain a work-life balance. I'm hooked up again with my friends from Myanmar, or my local friends who I knew from before. And then I didn't work on the weekends anymore, and kind of tried to take it off. I went through this journey of searching for myself, searching for healing, and took me to a lot of different places. I went way far into the forest, where I managed to find a guy who still did traditional tattoos and did a lot of traditional tattooing. That's symbols that are supposed to drive out evil spirits from your body and all those kind of things. I went also way to the borders, where people weren't really allowed to go before, because the country had opened up, and the government had changed. They weren't necessarily open, but because I'd been there and I spoke the language, I knew how to get around. So I went as far out in places where I'd see people in the forest and they'd run away, and then I'd see them later, kind of following me from behind, like watching me, until I got to the next village, walking and talked to whoever was the head there, and stayed there overnight. And I just went through this long journey, so slowly getting better, still trying to find myself. And I guess the most important part in terms of this story is that I ended up being for a month a monk in, let's say, one of the more strict monasteries, doing something called Vipassana, where you're not supposed to talk as well. But unfortunately, it didn't work for me. I didn't want to talk, but because I could speak Burmese, and in Myanmar, when you're struggling and you don't really know what to do with your kids, you can't feed them, you can't educate them, you send them to the monastery. Right? So I was in the monastery with all these people, and the kids, once they found out that I could speak English, that I could speak Burmese, they'd ask me millions of questions. I'd come out of the meditation time and they'd be waiting for me. Do you have rice in your country? Or all these different things. But it was great, and because I got them, they said one day, hey, do you want to come meet my teacher? And I was like, all right, yeah, I'll go meet your teacher. I thought it was just going to be an older monk, but it was the head monk, and I had a nice conversation with him. But in that time, that month there of intense meditation, from 5:30 in the morning basically till 7 at night with some breaks in between, I really found the connection again to nature, and I found a connection to myself. I managed to leave behind a lot of things I was hanging on to. But that connection to nature and how nature and people are really connected really rang into me. How, even in cities and parks, you have trees, you have these things, you have this kind of life. Your life is playing off of that life, and vice versa, and you're influencing it, and it's influencing you. Mm-hmm. So I came back and I said, all right, well, I'm starting to get a little bit, let's say, disenfranchised by development, by the international development sector, right? It tends to be perpetuating itself so that it can keep making money, right? We're pumping out new people, graduating in degrees in international development. These people expect to get jobs. Right? Organizations also have people who they employ as careers, right? So there's basically, it's a perpetuating thing. We're perpetuating the need, and the biggest problem is us. The biggest problem is us and the resources that we consume and our unwillingness to share, and not have two cars so that somebody in another country can have a car. Mm-hmm. That's a bad example, but that's just the one. So And I started to think, well, maybe the best way to kind of have development is to basically, start something yourself and employ people, give them a good job, good pay, and treat them kindly. So I started to look around in Myanmar as the land kind of opened up, the land laws opened up. Where land before was socialized, so no one could own it, the state owned it. But then it opened up to be privatized. Foreigners couldn't buy it, but I had some friends that we went around looking for land to start some kind of organic farm. And basically this time, I kept going every year back to France to see my friend. And finally, after a lot of thought and a lot of funny trips looking for land that included meeting some drug lords and some drunk lawyers and end up in some poppy fields sometimes on accidents, I kind of thought, well, I can't really stay here and make my own. I have to always be dependent on somebody else to own the land or to navigate the system. And at the same time, just because of my morals, foreigners over there, you're going to have to pay something to somebody at some point just to do business. That's just how it is. That's how it's expected. It's called tea money there, basically. Money. Before, I think it was just a little bit of money that you kind of bribe someone. They used to buy tea, but now, it can be like $10,000. So expensive tea. And then I kind of thought, well, yeah, I should go back, or why not go into vineyards? Why not go into viticulture? You keep coming back to France, you keep enjoying the wine, you keep liking it. And then I had this idea that why not start something like that, like woofing, working for organic farms, but for people who have been traumatized or who have broken down, like you. There's one thing that did help me in a very dark time in Berlin. Buying that apartment was actually working on it. You keep your hands busy, but your mind is free. And I really didn't really have anyone to talk to besides that psychologist who had been through something similar. He had been through something similar. Sorry, no one had been through something similar that I know. He tried to tell me a story that bookshelf fell on his cat, and then he had this stress and such urgency that he could lift the bookshelf off his cat. It's like that's not the same thing as being shot at. But yeah, so there really wasn't anyone. So that kind of thing, having a vineyard and hopefully a winery as well, where people could come and kind of recover and be part of that process. And then at the end have a final product as well would be a good thing. And in my mind, it was always the vineyard and the winery are the same entity, and the vineyard manager and the winemaker are the same people. That's always my mind, how I saw it in France, and often in Europe as well, where I'd been. So I was, looking online, what I do, did I do an internship and then I saw this program, Masters in Viticulture and Enology in Montpellier, and I thought, that's it. That's it. I go back to Montpellier. I know the people there. I love the area, and so I went back and started studying, and that's how I ended up in wine. Never looked back. Never regretted. I did kind of make a transition to say when I left, I saw that my staff in Myanmar were getting a little nervous. So basically, I made it where I worked one day a week remotely. That's kind of coaching for a year. So I kind of kept one foot in that door while I was studying and working in vineyards and wineries in France at the same time. It was difficult because my working hours from 5 a.m. till 8, and then I go to class. But yeah, that's the long story.
Definitely a unique path into wine and a heavy path. That's interesting. Before we get on, I want to back up for just a second. Tell me about the work you were doing on a day-to-day, year-to-year basis. International development, economics, kind of a foreign concept, I think, to a lot of people, especially to me. So tell me about what the work entailed outside of the emergency setting. What were you doing in the other countries when you went to these places for a year or for however long? What were the projects you were trying to achieve?
Yeah, so basically you try to look at what are the root problems there that's causing poverty, and a lot of them are agricultural, right? Because you're working in rural areas as well, so it might be lack of seed or quality seed, lack of money, lack of credit. Here you can buy a thing in credit. I bought a tractor, 84 months, no down payment, zero interest, right? You can't do that there. And then as well as what's up the chain. Is it being processed? What's the sale? As farmers are always doing raw commodities, and that's always the lowest price of anything. Like a cup of ramen noodles. Only 5% of that goes to the farmer. of the cost, right? And that only costs, what, 50 cents, including the packaging. So we basically try to help with that. So we do a lot of training as well. We supply things not necessarily for free, but kind of maybe on loan. So they pay it back as extra earned income, and then look at linking them sometimes to European markets, sometimes to local markets. Or in the case of Myanmar, we end up building up a big farmer cooperative that actually bred and produced seed and sold it to the country. It was the first registered seed cooperative, first registered seed company, actually, in Myanmar. We also built up a big women's savings and credit, kind of like On Point or whatever. At the end, there was about 2,000 women in there, and they had around $600,000 in capital, which is a lot considering that the average salary is around $200 per year. So that was a lot of money. We actually ended up teaching them computers. We made an app like on smartphones and things like that. But yeah, that's kind of the goal is basically that we're bringing people out of poverty by providing them the resources and the education that they need. At the same time, being a project manager, you kind of have to do everything because a lot of time the education levels is not what it needs to be. So you got to be the accountant, the HR manager, you have to train the agriculture staff, you have to be a logistics person, all these different things. Not yourself all the time, but you have to train people to do that. So you have to know how to do that to do that. So you kind of end up being a jack of all trades as well. So as you move up in development work, you get a little bit away from the farmer, and you're more working with the staff or working with the farmers. But I made a big effort always to go out and talk directly with the farmers, especially if you can speak the language. It makes it a lot easier, and building trust is very, very important as well. And that's a big thing, because if you're telling someone, who's like, they're like here, right? They're like just above water. You're like, they're barely getting by. If you say, I think you should do X to your field, if you give them wrong advice, then they're going to go under. So you got to take it very, 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 very seriously. And I think sometimes people in development work don't, and that's another issue. But of course, the main issue is again, not to go too much into this in the wine topic, but we'll have something. I was working on one of the crops we were growing in Gambia was potatoes. And it's really hard to grow potatoes in a hot climate. You have a very, very short window. You got to plant exactly on time. You got to pre-germinate all the potatoes. So we did that with the money from the Dutch government, and as we're harvesting potatoes, a big boat comes from Holland and dumps potatoes in the market, and drives the price down. Right? So what do you do? So I think a lot of things are making, and I kind of got the feeling sometimes that international organizations sometimes were like the marketing for the government. We're helping farmers in Africa, but like, what are we doing here to change that? I mean, we're still buying all the cobalt from Congo to make smartphones, and increasing the war there, right? So we have to change here on this level, on our level here. And I think Oregon does a pretty good job of working towards that. I think, so. But yeah, that's it.
Sure. Interesting.
Nutshell.
Interesting. So tell me about the education then in Montpellier. You get there for a master's in enology and viticulture. Tell me about the process for you of being back at school, getting a master's degree, and diving into the wine and vine world kind of full on.
Yeah, I mean, I guess being a student in your late 30s when everyone else is in their early 20s is always interesting. But it was nice for me because I had saved up money. I could buy nice wine. I didn't have to buy the wine out of the box like everyone else. And even there in France, like $20 is, you can buy a really good bottle of wine for $20. So, but yeah, it was hard at first, and I was working while going to school. I was working in a small vineyard and winery, going out there doing the labor, learning how to prune, learning how to drive a tractor. And then there's some times when I freaked out, in this 2,000 liter, fermentation tank, scrubbing the tartaric acid off, the wine crystals off, be like, what happened to me? I used to be in charge of, $20 million per year. Now I'm scrubbing the acid off the tanks, but in the end it was good. It was the right choice. I never looked back, and I always had that eye on doing that myself. One day, and it really was freeing, being in agriculture and following this this idea and this dream, this long-term perspective. I was in France, and then the program was also going to another university as well. You had to go to two, so I went to Germany. That's actually where the German came in handy as well, because it made it a lot easier to assimilate into the society. Did society there. So I worked full time during school, and then also in the summers for 2 different wineries, actually, just trying to get better perception. And I got really inspired by the people who did that. Going to the field, going to the cellar, everything's on the line. They have to market everything themselves, and they have a very beautiful life. It's a very, very hard life. And I think that's something that I knew, having worked in agriculture before coming in, is that it's not easy. There's nothing romantic about it. That's for sure. But I love it, and I love doing it. And that really inspired me. And eventually, I got a call from a biodynamic winemaker I knew in the Mosel, who I knew through friends of school. He was the first organic winemaker in the Mosel, where I kind of made fun of him, and also then later the first natural winemaker who makes quite good natural wines. And I met him a few times, and we had long conversations. But he basically recommended me to another person who called me and said, "Do you want to come run my winery in the Mosel?" At first I was like, don't know if I have an experience to do that. but I'll do it. They wanted to shift over to be biodynamics. So I went over, and that's really where that German comes in again, because everything was in German. Ran the vineyard, ran the winery, shifted the process over to biodynamic. And the goal was I had saved up some money, not enough money as I had hoped to start my own thing, as it is very, very expensive as well. But so the deal I had with the owner was that, all right, I'll come work for a year, and if it works out well, then I'll buy into this, or basically like I'll rent the winery and land from you, and then you can go. Because she had taken it over from her father, and I'm not so sure she really wanted to take it over. Kind of those things where like there's no one else to take it over, so yeah, you have to do it in the Mosel of Germany, in very, very steep slopes and very, very hard working conditions, especially where the average bottle price is €3 per bottle. So a lot of work going into it for not a lot of money coming out. The winery itself was quite old as well. It was from the 1800s even, so very, very old cellar, very, very traditional winery. And at the end, we didn't really get along very, very well, myself and the owner. I think I had a lot of different ideas than she did. There's nothing wrong with that as well, but after one full vintage, it was decided that she wanted somebody long term, and it was quite clear that I wasn't very happy there. So they will go. So I decided to leave it. It's also quite hard in the Mosel. Even though I did speak German, the people are quite close there, and people would look at me like I was an alien. I mean, especially as my car had French plates, they'd even be like, "French person, like, what is he doing here?" And like when things always break in agriculture, everything breaks, as you're out there in rough conditions, So it's like, all right, the tractor broke. That's fine. Let's just borrow the neighbors. That's what we do in France, right? What's it called? So, and they're like, "No, we don't do that here. We don't bother. We stay to ourselves, And that's kind of like, well, that's not really a community, It was only after that first vintage, when I was kind of at a wine fair in the village, presenting our wine, that people actually came to talk to me after 1 year of being there. I guess I kind of passed the test anyway. But yeah, so I was trying to think of what to do, and I had a lot of good friends who were really kind to me and gave me a lot of options. My friend Stefan from France, the first person I started to work with outside of Montpellier, he basically said, "Look, I found about 5 hectares, about 12 acres of land here to buy. The guy's willing to sell it to you. You can come buy it. I'll sell you some more grapes, and then you can come stay with me, and I'll help you learn French better, because my French is pretty bad, and we'll help you get set up and everything." At the same time, I had another friend, Martin Sturm, who was an organic winemaker on the Rhine, in the Rheingau, and he also said the same thing. Come work for me part time. you'll earn money, and then I'll help you start up something yourself. So I had those opportunities there, to try and start something myself, and but I don't know, something just didn't feel right. I got a bit tired of being a foreigner. I also got a little bit tired, so to say, of not being able to feel fully in my culture as well. Although I was very, very afraid if I came back here, I would be completely out of culture, right? And what might happen there as well. At the same time, I started to think, I'd always been very critical about the U.S., about what's happening outside. But it's easy from outside looking in, right? You see what happens politically, economically, and even in terms of talking about the healthcare issue, right? And I realized that it's very, very easy to be critical. It's harder to go try to do something about it, and coming from that development mindset, I had thought, I should go back. It's time to go back. Europe is a good transition. You come from Asia where things are completely different. You come to Europe where it's different but somehow similar, and then come back home. And I always kind of thought if I'd gone anywhere, it would be Oregon. And I went to a booth in Pro Wine, which is a very, very big wine fair in Europe, in Germany, where there's thousands of producers, and it takes you about an hour to walk across it. If you walk all the way around it. And that's also where you realize how big the competition is in the world. It's just massive, and it's more massive than you can even imagine. And I went to the Oregon booth, and I went to a seminar in Oregon, Pinot Noir, and I was just completely blown away. I was like, I never knew that about Oregon. I was like, wow, this is amazing. At the same time, I met a few people from Oregon in my life who told me constantly how awesome Oregon was, which I think people from Oregon do. So I saw this advertisement come up for teaching viticulture at a community college, and I kind of thought, well, that's it. I mean, it's in Oregon. I've been missing this development aspect, this helping people aspect, and working in vineyards. I miss that kind of community you're trying to better something, and this might be a good way to do it. So as well, I came here. I got an interview, surprisingly. I was completely shocked. So I came here for the interview, one, just because I'd never been here, I wanted to see it, and also to do the interview. And I just fell in love with the place, with the nature and the mountains, and that's something that you don't really have in a lot of other places that we have in the US. It's just the big nature that's here. I drove to the mountains, drove to the coast, went around to some wineries, and another thing that kind of shocked me was how nice everyone was. Everyone is super nice. When I told them, typical conversation, what do you do here in the tasting room, or why are you here? And I told them they would take me back in the cellar, I'd talk with the winemaker, and I really felt that sense of community again. As well, just from that short visit. The only thing that bothered me a little bit was that everyone would ask me what country I came from, because my accent's a bit weird, and also my syntax now is a bit weird. And I'd be like, I'm from here. Sorry. But yeah, so I did the interview, and basically when I went up to do the interview, there was a guy leaving. They were talking to him in a suit, and I looked at what I was wearing, which is basically like this. I think I had a collared shirt on, and I was like, they're never gonna hire me. No way. I don't even have experience in Oregon. All of my wine experience is coming from Europe, the European perspective. But yeah, I had the interview, and then when I was on the plane back, I got a phone call saying, will you do a second interview? And then I got the job, and I moved back. I never lost the dream of starting my own thing, doing my own thing. And one of the things that surprised me also when I came here was how many wineries rent out cellar space to other people as a way to make more money. I think that's a really good model, I think, especially here where things are quite small. More boutique wineries than anything else. And it's a way to earn money. And also I was surprised that there were wineries that didn't have a vineyard but bought grapes. Right? One of the first places I went for tasting was Walter Scott. It was great wine, but they didn't have a vineyard. And I was kind of like, wow, that's interesting. That's completely against the European model that I've been in. There's nothing wrong with it at all. I think it's great to be able to pick grapes from different sites and play around with it. That's really, really cool. So I thought, well, I take this teaching job. I'll also be able to contribute a bit more, and I can start something myself, right? So I immediately got on the Oregon Wine Production Facebook page and started looking for grapes. Ended up with 4 tons of grapes from organic biodynamic growers, and at the same time I kind of hooked up with someone who has a mini vineyard. I don't want to say how big it is because it's embarrassing. It's very, very small, but they basically said, look, we don't want to deal with it anymore. If you want to come take it over and keep the grapes, that's fine. So I took that on as well, which I do it completely by hand, zero carbon farming, which is quite tough, but luckily it's very small. So okay, and I rent space at Abbey Road now, and making my wine, which should be released fairly soon under the name Human Cellars. And so being able to do that on the side as well, and then finding the place we're in, and now having that money actually that I had from the apartment that I bought in Berlin, in a neighborhood that everyone made fun of me because it was pretty run down. It got gentrified, and so I bought it very cheap and ended up being able to buy these 8 acres that I have here to start something up. So being the teacher, one thing in terms of being able to help people and to bring them up and meet their goals is great for me. And at the same time that I have enough free time to do my own projects is very, very important. Especially just having the summers off is great. I still teach one class. You can't be a vineyard management instructor and not teach in the summer. Doesn't make any sense. But the rest of the time is fairly free to pursue these other things, which also really attracted me to the job. And once I got here as well, I found out about the Aivoy, and immediately when I found out about that, I said, look, I want to do this. I want to be involved in this, because bringing up vineyard stewards or helping people move up is great. It's something we should be doing, and it's something that I had done for so many years that I kind of missed it, and that kind of made me feel much more whole in a sense, that I wasn't just in an industry that's looking for luxury product, but also wants to take care of the very foundation of people that it relies on, which are the farm workers. It doesn't matter if it's blueberries or it's grapes or whatever. And the fact that there's something that's trying to improve them and to improve their situation, I think is great. I'm glad that we could be a part of it, especially as a community college, right? Because the word is there, community, right? So we should all be there. And it's been a good experience so far. I mean, I haven't managed to meet a lot of people due to COVID. I often think if I had taken over or started in France or Germany, I would be dead. I'd be bankrupt. I'd be alive, obviously, but I'd be bankrupt, right? I would have put all my money into everything, and then everything was shut down. And not being established in the market would have been tough with no secondary income source. So looking back on it, it was the right choice. I also, the first day I arrived here in Portland, I met a girl and fell in love and got engaged as well. So it just seemed to work out well.
I guess you were meant to be here eventually. That's awesome. Congratulations.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I think it's one of those things where it's the right place at the right stage of life. I would have never been ready earlier, and now it's just the time to come back and to start something in a way where you already feel comfortable in your own skin and who you are. Start that out. That's always a long journey as we're constantly changing throughout our life.
So many questions to ask, but I'm going to back up for a second. I'm curious, you came into viticulture obviously with a background in agriculture, background in horticulture, background in all that. Tell me about learning viticulture. Was there anything surprising about it? Is there anything unique about growing grapes versus growing other kinds of things?
Yeah, I mean, I think the great thing with grapes, the interesting thing about grapes is how terroir driven it is, right? Terroir site driven, right? And that's really being able to farm in a way that you maximize that expression of your site, of your soil, of your climate, of your it's a general environment. It's great, and it's one reason why I think, at least in my experience here, and also in France and Germany, is that people who do vineyard management are super open And also winemakers, they'll tell you what they did. They'll tell you how they made their wine. They'll tell you everything, and you kind of think, well, why are they doing that? Isn't there some competition, But I think that because it's so site specific, there's this feeling that no one can replicate your terroir. Even if they're the vineyard next to you, right? You're still slightly different. And you're probably, even if you farm exactly the same, you're going to come off still a bit different. So that's one side. The other side, and what also drew me to it as well, is basically, good wine comes from good grapes, and the style of wine you want to make comes from there, right? It comes from the soil, it comes from what you do there. And it's in agriculture, that's super interesting perspective. Quite often we grow for volume, or we do grow for quality, but there's not really thinking about too far down the line. In this way, you're really trying to think, all right, half of my art is the way I farm, and the other half of my art is how I make wine from that. So there's the two sides. So I think those were the two things that really drew me. What was surprising to me was how much labor is involved. It's a very, very labor intensive operation as well. But again, that's good for people. Mechanization is not good for everyone as well, unless there's other jobs to replace once there are lots of mechanization. That's again another side.
So you obviously haven't really had a chance to fully integrate into Chemeketa yet with COVID going on right now and not being able to actually do everything in person yet. But I'm curious, as you've come into teaching, what is it you want students to get out of your classes? What are you hoping to bring to the table, and what are you hoping students will take away from your experience and from your teaching?
Yeah, my experience myself going through the process is I learned a lot on the job, as everyone does. You learn all the practical stuff, right? In school, you learn the theory behind things, but until you really actually do them. And that's kind of what I want them to take away, is the hands-on stuff. And that's the nice thing about community college, is that we have a vineyard, we have the tractor. I get students now in the tractor. There was a few years we didn't. It's a risk for the school, that's for sure. But our tractor is pretty easy to drive. Or how to mount the implements, all these small things. Every student has about 4 rows in the vineyard, 2 rows of reds, 2 rows of whites that they basically have to manage. Not spraying, because we spray the whole vineyard at once, but that they're actually getting that hands-on, making the mistakes that they can make in our vineyard and not paying a heavy penalty for it. And God, if you can prune in the Chemeketa vineyard, you can prune anywhere, because that thing is, I don't want to say badly pruned. It's pruned by people who are learning, right? So when people come to learn, they see cuts are all crazy. There's wounds everywhere, It's challenging, but it's a good way to learn as well. So that and just that people can have confidence to do that. And one of the nice things, especially with the tractor, is that when you got people in this year, because we're now back to face-to-face, a lot of, I hate to put the gender stereotype, but a lot of women were afraid of it, right? And once they got in and drove through the little obstacle course that I set up with cones, they came out and much like, that's not so hard, and that kind of confidence booster. They're like, yeah, I can do it. I can do this. There's no reason why I need to think that I can't, or that holding back because of my gender or my weight or I say weight, strength, sorry, or strength or whatever, Then that's kind of what I want them to bring back. At the same time, that everyone does things differently. You have to decide for yourself. My goal was to have lots of guest speakers and lots of field trips. That's cut down quite a lot. We did have start a new class. I will start in the spring, which is organic and biodynamic viticulture, as we get a lot of questions on that, and there's just not enough time to dedicate. So being able also to offer that option as well, I'd like them to get that out, that there are these different systems. And especially if you're working for a vineyard management company, even though live might be the predominant certification form, you might have one vineyard that's organic, that's Oregon Tilth, and one vineyard that's Demeter, right? So you need to know all of that. But it's funny, our board is great, and they're usually, pretty agreeable to what we have to say. But when I put this class up for approval by them, it was the most lively conversation we've ever had. Do we offer it or not? What's the science behind it? All these different things. But at the end, the vote was to do it. So I think being able to bring that into the industry, and there's not a a lot of that being offered. The only other university I know that offers that, or I would say higher education, sorry, we're not a university, is in Germany, where I studied in Geisenheim, which is why I went there as well. But I think that, yeah, I mean, as it is a certification system, we need to be teaching it. We need to be relevant. So that's basically, I mean, the tools that they need to go out there and get a job or start their own thing. And our classes are really fun, mostly because we have this mix of students who are, some are young, starting out, you know, they're looking for jobs, and some graduated with a PhD in rocket science from Google and worked in Google or something, and retired at 60 and asked me super hard questions sometimes. So it's kind of, it's fun to have this kind of mix of people, you know, the ones who are really analytically minded, who bought a vineyard, and the ones who are starting out, trying to learn, and have them both in the same room. It's pretty interesting.
Obviously, we've heard over our many interviews of Chemeketa often. I mean, it's such a stalwart part of the industry now, and so many people have come through it. I'm curious what your first impressions were of the school and the program and the students, and sort of what you thought you could bring that wasn't already being offered. Obviously, you mentioned organic biodynamic already. What else do you bring to the table that for the next generation of Oregon wine growers?
Oh, that's a really hard question. I have to answer that one carefully. No, yeah, I mean, I was also surprised when I came here for the interview, you know, and went around to wineries and was doing tastings, was finding out about the industry here. The people asked me why I was in Oregon, and I told them for this interview. They're like, "Oh, I went to school there," and I was like, "Really?" Like, I didn't realize that there was so many people had gone through the program. So I did feel a bit intimidated by it, I had to say. I think from my side, bringing in my European perspective as well, I have to admit it, one of the challenges for me starting was actually going back to pounds per gallon and not grams per liter. It took me, I had to really rewire my brain for that as well. But I think just that other perspective of the European perspective and this perspective, and why sometimes we copy something from the European perspective and try to put it here, but it doesn't really make sense here. And basically why we have to be more specific. As well, luckily for me, coming out, not really in the viticulture side, but I do teach some wine tasting classes. One of them is called Wines of the World. And that's a lot of fun for me because I've worked and lived in a lot of these wine regions. So to be able to like go into detail on this, on the site, the terroir, the management, and even the culture of those areas is also nice. But yeah, I hope that, I mean, besides the biodynamics, just trying to be open and try to expose students as much as I can to the industry, and to connect them as much as possible with each other, and help them, you know, meld into this network that's here, that's already very supportive. And yeah, I tried the network a lot when I arrived here. That got shut down after a while, but I hope to continue to get more and more people coming in and involved in the school, and yeah, that we're basically you know, keeping the quality of the industry alive that we have, and that people are able to find the workers that they need, or people are able to start something on their own as well. One thing that I try to bring in as well is it was a little bit tough for me at the beginning to break it down into vineyard manager and winemaker, because to me those are the same. So I try to integrate a lot of that into our class, and it was really interesting with Iowa because it would ask a lot of questions like when the winemakers come and tell us in the harvest why this time, why not that time, and to be able to explain that, or to tie in like how does our decisions in management of the vineyard affect the wine quality, or what is the winemaker trying to do with that? That also I think helps. So I try to bring in the other side as much as I can, because I feel like that's something that we need to know for sure. On the other side, I kind of see our small vineyard there at Chemeketa as an example vineyard. So it's tough to manage because, you know, we'll have like 6 rows of one variety, 6 rows of another. But we are trying out some new varieties in there that are becoming more popular here. We have some, we just planted some Vermentino, we'll top graft over to some Zweigelt. These things are kind of popping up here and there in small pockets. But Pinot Noir will always be king here, and it is our flagship grape and we need to stick to it. But we are also a small industry, so production of Pinot Noir is going to reach a point where there's going to be a lot of fruit on the market, let's put it that way. So I think just to diversify, especially for closer markets, like Portland or San Francisco or other things that maybe are a bit more wineys. I don't know who would look for. People now even look for what Trousseau from Oregon or Gamay. It's big now, or Chardonnay. So I think we can kind of also take the risk at our vineyard with our by planting 1 or 2 rows of these things to see how they ripen, how to make wine more than the industry themselves have to take it on.
You talked earlier a little bit about your kind of initial impressions of the industry and your initial kind of travels around and tastings and the kind of community aspect that you had missed. Tell me what else did you kind of initially think about Oregon wine and the industry? What stood out to you about it, and where did you see again like room to grow?
Well, yeah, the quality of wine, number one, is very, very, very high. On that. Nice. The second thing I quite liked about it when I arrived here is that it's not a wine region per se where there's just vines everywhere. Like you'll have a dairy and then you'll have a vineyard and you'll have some hazelnut trees and then a vineyard. So I like that kind of diversity of landscape. And I think that brings a lot to Oregon as well, and just also into the wine in terms of having a diverse system instead of a giant monoculture around. Could you repeat the question? Sorry, I got lost in my thought.
Just like your initial impressions of the industry and then sort of where you saw room to grow.
Yeah, sorry. So I definitely see room to grow as well. Just in terms of site, as it gets warmer, we'll definitely have to explore different sites. I think there's room to grow looking for other varieties. So I think Chardonnay is a good option. And so we'll have to see what comes up with Gamay as well. But one thing I think is for sure is that as it gets warmer, we're going to have to adapt. And that's kind of where we're going to have room to grow. We might look at another variety to introduce as a flagship grape, slightly warmer. And then we'll have to plant higher for Pinot Noir, mostly because as we warm up, we're going to start to lose that very delicate acid-driven Pinot Noir that we're known for, right? So, and that's could be a marketing problem, I honestly think, right? So I think there is room for growth for another slightly warmer grape. Whatever that is going to really depend. There's a lot of experimenting going on, I think. But it's going to happen, definitely. Bordeaux just added several varieties to their list of allowed varieties. The most conservative Appalachian ever, they realize this. So I think also with them, what's going to happen with them is going to be interesting to watch as they start to make wine without their traditional Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Petit Verdot varieties. How are they going to adapt to the market as well? Oregon is definitely in the right spot right now in terms of market, and hopefully it will stay that way in terms of higher acid, lower alcohol wines that people want. So it's in a good spot. I only hope that it doesn't grow too much, and that's kind of selfish, I guess. We wanted to grow, but I think one of Oregon's beauty is how the community is and how we help each other in this diverse landscape that we have. And if it all gets planted out to vines and we start to get more competition, that's going to be difficult. And that's kind of really what I loved about it when I came here. It was so much like southern France. Southern France was a bulk wine area. Just young people started the past 10 years to really try to produce quality wine. Everyone's helping each other out. Similar to here, people came and started and told them that it wasn't possible. Everyone kind of had to help each other to survive, and that spirit is still there. So I think if that spirit stays on, then there's definitely room to grow in terms of marketing, so to say, or sales. Yeah.
Obviously, you mentioned one of the things you bring is experience in a number of wine growing regions in the world. Tell me how Oregon compares in terms of sort of the atmosphere, the wine quality, and just sort of in general compares to other places you've been and worked.
The wine quality in Oregon is very high. I think because there's not really that bulk wine production here. We're not producing for volume. We're producing for quality. Almost everyone, So that's definitely there, and that's very much in contrast to, say, a lot of places where I was in the Languedoc area, where, with the exception of this handful of winemakers who are really trying to control quality, it's really a lot about production as well. And in Germany as well, it's a dance between quality and cost. Steep slopes. We had one steep slope. It was about an acre as well, and the rest, other 14 acres that we had on slopes that were not so steep. You could still drive a crawler on them, but that 1 acre was by hand, and it took us the same amount of man hours to do that 1 acre as the other 14. So in terms of quality, it gets a bit lost because you can't hire all the people that you need to farm that. It's just not possible, considering that the bottle prices are at $3 on average per bottle, right? And I was at winery where I was managing was the higher end one, where like a bottle of Riesling was 12. People are like, $12 Riesling, that's expensive. We did have some Pinot Noir that it's very, very good. I think the Pinot Noir from Germany is excellent if you can find it. It's hard to find coming out of the Ahr or even pockets of Baden or the Mosel. It's very similar to here. So the farming style between those is pretty similar. Of course, you have your typical differences. The spacings. Here we have much wider rows. We don't have so many plants per acre. We also are very, very lucky here, and I don't want to make anyone in the industry mad, but our pest and disease issues are easy compared to Europe. I mean, there we have powdery mildew, like we have here. Downy mildew, which is another one that comes under the leaves. We have the spotted grape moth, European grape moth, the Asian grape moth. We have fruit fly. So you get a disease when it rains. You get a disease when it doesn't rain. There's always something coming at you from every angle, and you're constantly being proactive. And when I came here, we have powdery mildew, and some botrytis, it's quite tough. And I'm just that's it. That's all you have. I think these other diseases, they will start to come in, and maybe that's something where I can also add, having battled those diseases constantly. But that also helps it improve the wine quality here, where you don't have to really hit it so hard with chemical, organic or conventional. It's still a pretty heavy fight, I would say.
Obviously, you have a long history of interest in organic farming and now biodynamic growing. Tell me about the importance of those to you and to your kind of vision of the future here. Why organic and biodynamic in Oregon, and what do you see for their future here in the Oregon wine industry? Yeah,
I see it growing, and for sure, a lot of people are moving over to organic or biodynamic. Not necessarily certifications, but just in farming practice. And so I think there's something to that in terms of trying to respect the environment, and human health. We never know what's going to show up in the grapes eventually. Everything is safe now that we know of, but there were some reports that glyphosate was found in some wine recently. So we never really know. As our science gets more exact and precise, we're able to tell how these different chemicals end up in the wine. I don't want to say that environmentally, organic or biodynamic is always better than conventional, because I don't think that's true. You can spray all over the place with sulfur, and kill every single insect around. That's not good, Or you can be very, very conservative, conventional farmer, live certified farmer, and do a great job. I don't really feel like it's one or the other. It's organic versus conventional, or biodynamic versus conventional. I think in the market it's growing as well. One nice thing about here compared to Europe and the stricter EU laws is that there's a lot of things available here that we never saw in Europe. Some of the biologicals, or like cinerate, this cinnamon extract. We basically have sulfur, copper, and calcium, potassium carbonate. That's it. We have 3 things. Here we have all sorts of stuff. So it makes it a bit easier to try to take it down. And I look at places like Keeler, who actually were complete without sulfur, which is really hard. And they do have some loss, but it shows that it can be done. We can take it down. The next question is going to be, I think it's going to be more and more as well important once we get electric trackers as well, because our spraying time is basically almost doubled when we go to conventional. It can be 30 to 50% more, but that's a lot of driving time, right? And that's also calls into the question of carbon footprint versus not. So I think at the end, if you were just to use sulfur, and spray sulfur and Cali Green, it's about the same as conventional in terms of cost. It's not that much. that much off, including the labor. But when you get into the more expensive organics, then it gets more expensive. But I think it will continue to grow as people value it. The nice thing about live is that you have the 5% of the land that needs to be conserved, and Demeter needs to be 10. So I think that kind of holistic part is good. And I see people starting to pick up pieces of the other one. It's kind of like a mixed match, like. And live seems to be moving more and more almost towards organic as more things get put on the red list or the orange list. Like we have more and more chemicals getting chopped off there every year, it seems. So I think we're moving that way. And a nice thing, especially with all this research in cover crops, is just improving this biodiversity in the vineyard, so that it's not just a monoculture, but it is bringing in other aspects. It's kind of mimicking our landscape here of various farming systems coexisting together inside the vineyard. And I think that will continue to expand just because it's good farming. I mean, I'll be very honest. And biodynamics, which is my personal interest, I know a lot of people don't believe in it. I believe that just by paying attention to these small changes and cycles in nature, we can be better farmers. You don't always have to follow the stars or follow the moon, and sometimes you can't. Sometimes you got to spray. Or it's coming up towards April and you have to prune. You can't say, all right, we're going to prune, on the fruit day today and then stop the next day. Like sometimes it's just not possible. So I think it's about being dogmatic and being correct. And my good friend Rudy from the Mosel, he was very, very pragmatic, very dogmatic in terms of biodynamics. He was all for drones. He said, look, if we have drones, if we don't have to drive a tractor to spray, then let's do that. Like that's great. We don't have to be Luddites. We can move with technology. I mean, it just has to be in a respectful way of nature. And I feel the same way. I'm not anti-technology at all. I'm just more about paying more attention. And that kind of, as well, comes into, I guess, Human Cellars, what I'm trying to start now, where it's kind of a funny name, I guess, Human Cellars. There's no humans in the cellar, right? I mean, like in my cellar. But more of that is basically, that man is part of the agriculture system and not outside trying to control it, right? But is influencing it, and it's influencing you. There's that human aspect. The same in the cellar, right? That you're influencing the wine and the wine's influencing you as you make it. And you think about it, it's true. I mean, if you're in a bad mood, you go out there and prune, you make a lot of different decisions than if you're in a good mood, right? Same where you go out and everything's nice in your vineyard, you kind of tend to make slightly different decisions depending on how you're feeling, and I feel like the farm influences that. How your farm is doing and how you are doing influences the farm as well. Yeah. The other aspect of Human Cellars is that every wine that we make is dedicated to one of these farmers that we've met along the way. So one is dedicated to Rudy, one is dedicated to Stefan, one is dedicated to some farmers in Myanmar. One will come through for enologists of Portugal. So we try to bring in that aspect. And for me, again, that comes into biodynamics of how other people also influence you, and then how you influences you in your life and then your farming practice. And this is always an evolving system, and that kind of falls into a line of biodynamics and rhythms, and that everything is different every day. So to say.
So with your wine at Human Cellars, your upcoming wine, tell me about the style. Tell me about the philosophy behind the wine itself. After you get done farming it that way, what's the next step? What do you want in the bottle? Yeah,
so I being on my own now, not having to make wine for somebody else, I've taken a lot more risks than I would have. That's for sure. So my goal is basically to make wine as simply as possible and to express that site as simply as possible, which means that I'm very hands off. I mean, I know we're all like low intervention winemakers, right? Everyone says that, but I really try to step back, and I will only intervene if there's a problem. So I don't put any additives in there. I really try to stay back and let things go. But if there's a problem, I'm not like, it'll be fine. And if it starts to smell a bit like nail polish or whatever, I come in to do something. But yes, that's kind of the style. It's very, very, very low sulfur, no additions of acid or sugar or water. I mean, that's something that's interesting to me as well. Like, I mean, what's allowed in the New World, which I think is, again, stylistic choice and very well. Oftentimes it's illegal in the Old World. You know, like when you hear some things, you're like, you can do that, not go to jail. You know, so I think coming from that European perspective is also quite interesting, where you try to step back. Some of the wine is without sulfur completely, so far. Hopefully it will stay that way. But yeah, it's really kind of we step back and try to let the grape express itself, the terroir express itself as well, and then try to follow the philosophies of these people who we've met along the way. Which is why I think Eau de Rudy, the Riesling that's without sulfur, is also from Keeler, which is without sulfur in the vineyard, which is something that would have thrilled him, you know. So so those kind of things, you know, or our Gamay, which is dedicated to our friend Stefan from southern France, does have sulfur, but it's very, very low doses of sulfur. So yeah, a lot of neutral oak. I have only one. I'd say it's almost new barrel. It's new, but it's a rewind barrel, right? So it was refurbished, but I didn't use it this year. I didn't buy as many grapes as I wanted due to the big cloud of smoke that was hanging on top of us.
So you talked about with Human Cellars, you're making recently, you're making Gamay. Do you have thoughts on the future for what other varietals you want to work with, other things you want to grow and or make? Yeah,
so in here I'll start out with a few acres. And that's basically what I can manage myself with my job. I wish I had more money to put into it and plant the whole thing and be able to hire people to come in and do all the pruning and leaf thinning and all that work, but unfortunately not. So I will plant a little bit of a variety called Le Grain, which went from Südtirol up north, where I have a friend who's a winemaker. That's why I love that variety. I think with the southern-facing sloping aspect I have here, it should ripen. I'm pushing the limits a little bit, but I think especially with climate change, it will ripen. Especially, you know, in terms of management as well, and trying to advance management through the various, you know, canopy management or fruit thinning management strategies that we have. But yeah, it's on the border here of ripening or not ripening. But I'm looking for, you know, something that's going to blend well with Pinot Noir. I'd like to do more blends as well. And then the other one is Gruner Veltliner will come in as well. It's getting more popular here, so that will come in again on the site. And that's those two varieties. And then I'll see how they end up producing, and then from there I'll try to expand. Hopefully I'll be selling some wine and then have some income that will come in that I can put into the vineyard as well. But yeah, at the moment it's all expenses, all expenses. Yeah.
All the overhead.
Yeah, all the overhead as it is, you know. I mean, especially in vineyards, you know, you put it in. First 2 years is nothing. You might get something in the third year, but you won't really start earning anything till year 4. So. But yeah, and land's not cheap here. That's for sure.
You have all the experiences in almost everything, but you've never really sold wine before.
Yeah.
Tell me about that and looking ahead to that and kind of your plans for how you're going to sell your wine.
That kind of freaks me out, actually. But yeah, luckily my fiance is very outgoing, and hopefully we'll be able to go around and help us sell. But yeah, the initial idea when we started was you know, aiming at bars and restaurants and, you know, kind of niche places, even that might be looking for natural wine or low sulfur wine. With COVID, that kind of hit the fan a little bit. So we're trying to look around now and kind of reassess what to do. We have a friend in Carleton who has a farm store where they sell mostly meat, mostly grass-fed beef and chickens, and people are coming all the time. They're constantly sold out. So we will try to add our wine into that system to try to break in as well. But I don't make that much. You know, I have about 300 cases. 100 of that is Gamay, and the rest is, you know, 50 of Riesling, 50 of Chardonnay, 30 cases of Rosé. That should have been Pinot Noir, but got turned into rosé this year. But yeah, that's it. I'm hoping as well that the rosé is a zero carbon farmed rosé, so I'm hoping to catch some traction with that. And then the zero sulfur Riesling is as well, and the very, very low sulfur Gamay. And I think Gamay is a little bit easier to sell. If it was Pinot Noir, I might be a little bit more worried with the competition, because the competition here is tough for Pinot Noir. And really, really good wines with really, really good names. And I mean, definitely, I feel like in the wine industry, when people talk about, I want to make good quality wine, that's not enough anymore. Everyone makes good quality wine. You've got to have a better marketing strategy, better than us, anyway. Probably. But yeah. So we'll bottle pretty soon on the spring equinox, and then we'll have to tackle that monster. Having more time in the summer is anyway good. Allows you to go around more. Hopefully things will open up as well. But yeah, at least not having that much wine. Hopefully we can sell it. Let's see. If not, we'll just use it for our wedding.
That would be actually pretty unique. That'd be pretty cool, actually. Probably not as cost effective, perhaps.
Definitely not. But let's see.
You had talked earlier kind of about the idea eventually of having your own thing and having it be sort of a resource to other people who had similar situations to you or similar. So tell me about, as you look ahead for Human Cellars, is that still something you're interested in? Are you trying to turn it into something bigger than what it is?
Yeah, I mean, I would like to continue with that dream of hosting people here. So I did buy property, 8 acres, which is a house with an addition. So there's a complete there's 3 bedrooms, a full kitchen, living room, other part of the house that's connected to our house by a wall, or we share a wall. And that could very well, once we get all planted out here, and if there's enough still interest to do that, especially having the summers free, allowing people to come here and to kind of recover and talk with someone who's been through it. And I'm at the point now where I can talk about it openly. That's also when we type this interview. I really had a long conversation with myself of, do I say all this stuff on camera or not? Am I okay with it? But I'm quite comfortable with it now, which I think is a good sign of recovery, so to say. So, and having transitioned from one career to another, it's not very easy to transfer from development work into another profession. So I feel quite lucky that I was able to do that. So yeah, that's the goal. Let's see. We have to see another time. With COVID, saw what happened to a lot of retirement homes. So it could be that my parents end up there. I don't know, but yeah, eventually it would be very, very. That would be an end goal. I haven't forgotten that dream to do that and to help people. And it could come on maybe other forums. If eventually another winery would want to take that on, it could also be a part of it. But yeah, it has not been lost to sight. It's just been buried under and trying to start up and move back to a country. I won't say move to a new country, but it's the same country as I grew up. So
I feel like its own country sometimes out here,
Yeah. No, definitely.
We talked a little bit about both of the sort of tragedies of 2020 for the industry, COVID, of course, and the smoke and at harvest. Let's talk first about COVID a little bit more. Tell me about, you've talked a little bit already about the effects on your teaching and everything else. Tell me about sort of other effects you've seen and the way you've had to kind of pivot this year, and as we hopefully are coming out of it soon, what changes you've seen or you've taken on that you may see may become permanent after we come out of COVID.
Yeah, we see a lot of virtual wine tasting coming and trying to reach people that way. I'm not sure how effective that's been, to be very, very honest. We had to teach some classes like that, some wine tasting classes like that as well. It was quite tough. We're lucky that at least at Chemeketa we're able to meet in person, as long as we're far apart. And luckily I have 8 acres and not more than 12 students, so everyone can have 1 acre, or a little bit less than 1 acre. So in terms of Chemeketa, we're actually have seen a bump in enrollment for us. I think as people start to change careers, look at new things, or are able to work from home and say, hey, I want to move to Oregon, and try something else while working. So I think in terms of changing of industry in terms of influx of people into the industry, I think that there's going to be more at least trying to come in as they take a good long look at their life, being inside indoors for a year now. The industry is going to be tough to come back. I think it's really going to depend on. It's going to go two ways, right? It's going to be that people are going to be a bit nervous about going out again, and then the restaurants and the bars aren't going to open up. As Oregon being kind of a boutique, higher end wine, that's kind of a larger part of the market, I think. Or it's going to go where people are going to go crazy and everyone's going to run out, and then wine is going to fly off the shelves. It's going to. I think it's probably going to be the latter as well. It's going to be more like the Roaring Twenties than the Depression. And I hope let's see people that definitely saved up more money. I think with the smoke and everything, and the smoke that might come, I think we have to work very closely on our marketing as well, not to give this a bad vintage. There's going to be a lot of competition for sale of rosé as well. And I don't know how that's going to change, if that's going to increase the amount of rosé being made here in the future, if people find that they can sell it better and faster or not. It would definitely affect the income per bottle as well. But yeah, otherwise, yeah, it's going to be, I think it'll take a while for the industry to recover. And the general sector is people have less money to go to a wine shop and buy a bottle of wine that costs $80. And that's where I think, especially wines from Europe, even with the tax, now they're still fairly cheap. So that's just my opinion. I'm not a marketing expert, so just what I read in reports and just looking. But I don't think, Oregon is such a good name and it's so small that it's not going to die off. That's for sure. California is going to have some problems, especially having been on fire the past 4 years. They're really going to have to rethink their whole operating procedure there.
And speaking of fires, tell me about managing the fires at Harvest last year, both for yourself as a teacher and for yourself as a vineyard manager and winemaker.
We harvested in the smoke at our little mini plat. We had some friends come from Portland to help, but they stayed for 2 hours. They're like, I'm out of here. Like your lungs hurt, and I thought quite often about the people in the vineyards, like the vineyard stewards, like having to be out there every day, in this toxic air, and it really gave kind of like a feeling of panic, like it's this kind of a primal fear of like, we have that flight response, like fire, run, but like we can't run anywhere, like we can't drive anywhere for hundreds of miles. It's all under smoke. So I think that also, we're talking about biodynamics, that kind of brings in a little bit of tension, a little bit of stress into the vines. And a lot of people held off in terms of sugar accumulation. It basically froze for a week with no sun. It just stayed at 19 bricks and it just stopped. We lost some acid as well, which is important for us being a more higher acid driven wine region. In terms of at school, we canceled class. So all the measurements and the work were done by the winemaking instructor and myself. Going out there, taking all the measurements, and then when the students came, it was kind of a shame for them because we just basically within 1 week took everything off the field. So they missed out a little bit on that. In the industry, I think it's a lot of different responses, and it was quite tough because everyone's afraid of the smoke taint. Some people were trying to leave it longer, some people trying to harvest it earlier, trying to avoid it. People were making rosé. But what I found to be very, very sad is that we had a lot of cancellation of contracts or a lot of fruit that wasn't picked, not really based on any numbers. Mostly because the labs were 3 or 4 weeks out, right? There's no way to tell, right? But I feel like if you're going to cancel a contract, you need to do it based off of something, right? And even if it's taking the hit and saying, all right, we'll pay for the cost to harvest it at first, and then we'll see how it turns out. And if there's smoke taint, then we can discuss and pay half or nothing more. That would have been a good solution, I think, instead of this like we drop everything, kind of thing. And I don't know if how that's gonna affect relationships between growers and wineries in the future, if there's going to be less trust between them. I feel like it was very, very trusting, relaxed environment before. I'm not so sure if it's going to be that way now. I hope so. I hope things will go back to normal. But I think there's going to be a little bit of all right, let's make more detailed contracts between us to kind of keep everyone feeling safe, so to say. But yeah, it was a hard year, I think, for everyone, especially that lack of information and smoke being so site specific. Some sites got it a lot, some hardly anything. It's really tough. And Chemeketa, our wine is okay. We're working on it, but still, yeah. I mean, the reds, the whites are still very, very good. So it's tough. For me personally, I don't really have any smoking yet. In the Gamay, let's see what happens. But I actually, I guess, was maybe one of the people who might have profited because I took the fruit that someone else rejected. So I think in terms of maybe smaller winemakers, where it's hard to get hold of something like organic Gamay, kind of get a foot in the door a little bit. So in that way, as bad as it all was, it did open up a little bit of opportunity for some people. If that's just one person, just me, I don't know. But
I mean, it's funny you talk about contracts. I mean, like the idea of written contracts for wine grapes is so new to Oregon anyway. I mean, now they're gonna have to actually look at them a little bit more closely. It was handshakes for so long, right? So
yeah, the one we have at school is pretty funny. It just basically says, "I will buy 2 tons of Pinot Noir." That's it, at this price. It's one piece of paper with like 4 lines and a signature. So it's kind of funny.
So what do you see, we talked a little bit about the future already, but future for yourself, so tell me about kind of what you're seeing as you look 5-10 years down the road for yourself. What's going to happen to your teaching and to your business as you look ahead, and do you intend to be in the Oregon wine industry long term? Yeah,
I think I found the place for this time of life, and I feel like this is the last stage of my life. It sounds pretty depressing, but towards the end, this is kind of like my third career. But I don't see myself changing. And when I thought that before in development work, I don't see myself changing out of this. That was 20 years ago. So I don't see myself changing. I'm very happy with teaching as well, keeping that foot in the community and helping people to advance. I don't see myself at all leaving that position as well. The nice thing with agriculture and viticulture is that things are always changing. So always learning. There's always something new to learn, always something to teach. It's not like we have to teach the same thing every year. And also every season is different, so having that teaching vineyard every year is going to be different. The teaching is going to basically be moved around accordingly, which keeps things exciting. And I really enjoy it much more than I thought I would. Hopefully at the end, Human Cellars will pick up and be able to plan out all the land that I have and keep making wine, and then eventually start with doing that kind of hosting, or what I'm say, woofing for people with PTSD, so to say, and be able to bring that in. I still see that maybe 5-6 years down the line. It's going to be a long process, and I'm not in a hurry as well, and to make mistakes. This past year, while it was tough, it was probably one of the best years of my life. I mean, coming here, getting set up, starting making wine, meeting my fiance, and just the incredible learning curve that I had here my first season in Oregon. First time getting used to the area and to the way people farm here and all these different things. And then all these little hiccups that came in terms of COVID and smoke and all these different things. It's been nice. But the industry's been really helpful. So we said briefly before we started, first person I met was Alan Holstein, who basically took me around and explained to me a lot about how things were done here and why. And that helped me a lot. And unfortunately, I kind of lost contact with him after COVID. But hopefully once things open up, I'll be able to meet up with him again. But yeah, I think that's one of the things that will keep me here I don't see changing is that community, the community of people being so open. Even though I'm not really deep in the community, I'm on the periphery, I still feel a part of it. And that's very very important, especially working in development so long. You're working to develop villages, or you're working with 10,000 farmers, but you're not ever in that community. You're always on the outside, looking in, not really contributing. And this way, it's much nicer to be part of what I've been doing in the past in a different way.
Absolutely. And I know you're fairly new to the industry here, obviously. What do you see as you look ahead for Oregon's wine industry? Where is it going next? What's coming in the future, and what are you maybe excited about, and what are you maybe fearful of?
Yeah, I think this expansion into organics, biodynamics, I'm excited about that. There's more and more people picking that up as well. I think the Oregon wine industry is going to continue to grow, and it's still going to stick with Pinot Noir, but it's going to get better known for Chardonnay or possibly Gamay or some other varieties as well. So I think that's a definite positive, that kind of diversification. You have California, you have Cabernet Sauvignon and Chardonnay, right? You have two grapes. So it's also good for us to build that up, and it seems like we're making great wine out of those grapes, and there's a lot of potential to build that up, or even other varieties. So that's exciting as well. And staying like this, this kind of mixed farm vineyard environment really brings a lot to it as well in terms of tourism and being so close to the mountains. I think it's just going to grow. It's going to grow in terms of tourism, and it's probably will grow in terms of vineyard acres planted as people plant higher, looking for that cooler climate Pinot Noir. But I don't think it's ever going to get huge, and that's what I like about it as well. There's limited space to grow, which for grapes, which is nice. The big fear that I have is basically a loss of community that I see from the outside. And as California or the other wine growing regions become a bit more stressed because of water or smoke, they're going to be looking to diversify, and it could be that they come up here. Right now we're very, very small, so it's kind of hard for a bigger company to take on like 1,000 acres. You have to buy quite a few wineries to do that. But I think it will eventually happen. There'll be more and more moving up. Some have already come, but I think more and more will start to come into the industry, and that would be the fear, is to lose that friendliness. That, hey, can I borrow a tank, or hey, my tractor broke, or can I borrow your implement, or hey, I have this problem with my wine. What do you think? I really think that's such a valuable part of what makes Oregon wine Oregon, and it would be really a shame to lose that kind of ethos that I think is one of the main reasons why the wine is so good here.
Absolutely. So we started the interview off, you gave us kind of a brief history of wine's role in the world. I'm curious now, from your perspective, what role does wine play in society? Yeah,
it's an interesting question as well, because that was something I also struggled with. I go from working with poor farmers to try to grow wine so they can eat, to making a luxury product that people don't really need, and some people are even afraid of, so to say. But I think wine's role in society, being such a cultural thing, at least in our society, I don't think it's going to go away. It's such a celebratory thing, especially people have a nice good occasion. They have a nice bottle of wine. Even people who don't drink wine, if they go out for the anniversary, they order a bottle of wine. So it's deeply ingrained there. It will definitely stay within the Catholic Church, I'm sure, but that's a different, we can say, another level of quality of wine. But I see its value is there. Its value is there culturally, if it's not nutritionally, so to speak. We will have more battles as, we can say, the stigma around alcohol increases, right? And drinking in moderation or small amounts is that. But I still believe it has a role in society of bringing joy to people, right? Bringing joy, complementing other things, especially people who like to have a good meal and sit around. That's the heart of every family, right? The heart of every family. My main favorite holiday, Thanksgiving, people come around, they eat, there's no expectation of presents. They eat, drink wine or beer, and watch football. It's that kind of nuclear family that I feel like wine has a heavy part of, and that trickles out to so many other aspects of society and productivity and just living good life. I mean, I learned through my journey that money is not that important. It's more about following your morals and your community that's important in life, and being happy in the moment, and not hanging on too much in the past, and not being too much in the future. And I think that wine is one of those things that both brings joy at the moment, but at the same time also brings back pleasant memories from the past as well, whether it might be a wine that you had before with good friends, or or your family, or a wedding, or whatever happens. And I think that has significant value that we can't underplay, so to say, or can't play down. Yeah, so I think that will stay for a long time. And never know, maybe in Texas, when they'll have to now boil water, they can just pour wine. Wine needed to sterilize the water, right? So maybe that role will come back.
Wine in every emergency kit.
Yeah, wine in every emergency kit.
Love it. That's all the questions that I have for you, Bryan. Is there anything I didn't ask that I should have? Anything we didn't cover here today that we should have covered?
No, that was great. I really appreciate you reaching out to me. Considering I'm so new here, I was quite surprised, but quite thrilled to do that. And thank you for giving me actually a chance to get a lot of this, to put my life in order, and really think about how I'm going to tell the story, and how everything has progressed for me, and my journey and recovery has been really, really nice. I thought about it for weeks, to be honest, and in that was kind of therapeutic as well. So
I'm really glad to hear that. That's excellent, and you told it really well, and it was such a fascinating story and meaningful story. So thank you so much for sharing it and the rest of your story and your thoughts and perspectives, and we'll go ahead and let you off the hook.
All right, thanks a lot.
Thank you.